well. It looks like this sort of is where we're landing for people. So let me run through some of this week's notes. Blah, blah, blah. I'm not John Cogswell. You guys know that. But we're learning a lot from him anyhow. My waxworking class got snowed out, so there's still a chance if you would like to take it live and in person. It will be rescheduled for April 15th and 16th. And then there's the hollow forms and bezels and clasps classes online. Also, there will be no session on April 5th due to some of my work schedule. There is going to be the next session. I'm thinking I'm probably going to do the wax carving next session, and then that'll give me time to send it out and hopefully have it back for whatever it is, the 19th or whatever is the next one after the April 5th skip. So yes, this session, yes, next session, no, the session after that, and then we'll be back at it and closing in on the end. Seriously, this is flying. I'm going to do a shout out for something new because they just opened up their season. If you are a Girl Scout cookie fan and you don't have local Girl Scouts, I'm going to encourage you to support Scout 6000 if you haven't heard of it. It is a scouting troop that is based out of New York City for kids who are houseless, so that they can continue to have a programming that is related to Girl Scouts. And I just put the link up there. So as good as Girl Scout cookies are and as much support as that gives to Girl Scouts overall, this is my go-to place to buy them from if you're interested in that kind of thing. And they have flavors now online that you can't get directly from your Girl Scouts, which I don't understand. That's unreasonable. There's some, I just flashed and saw some raspberry chocolate something or other that looks amazing. What else? We've got the usual. If you haven't put in my Rio for Schools code, I will put it in the chat and remind you that you can use it to help get better pricing at Rio. And for the usual links, if you need them, here are all the links for my workshops and for my Instagram and all that good stuff. Oh, and the YouTube is, oh, I don't have the YouTube in this listing, do I? Yeah, I do. The YouTube recordings there. I finally got an @ so you can also go to @Eclectic Nature Jewelry on YouTube. So any leftover questions from last session or prior sessions overall, in which we did our bead settings and our attempts at various prong setting variations or the stitch setting variations?
I tried.
Good.
But
those stitch settings, those are rough. But the bead settings, did you try the bead settings too?
Yeah, I did, but I don't think I had enough metal to create the bead setting.
Yeah, that's because so when you've learned the stitch and you're going this way at something, the difference is the bead setting is more this way, down and in. So it's a little bit more digging. I find when I don't have enough material, I can sometimes dig a little further than I had and go back at it and bring it back up a little bit because it's not the tiny little stitch the way that the stitch settings are. The other thing is if it's not holding, I would bet you started too far away from the edge of the stone. That's the most likely thing if it's not holding. Because as long as your stone sets in well, then it's just about getting enough material to barely fit over it. And remember, that's another one that is designed to have lots of them bumped up against each other to really get the bling. It's an inexpensive way to add bling to a lot of small stones. And there are places that I wish I had remembered to write down for you guys that sell off old melee diamonds and stuff that's been taken out of other jewelry, which is a slightly cheaper way to get it. Or you can just get bulk, manufactured stones that are some really great colors in tiny, tiny settings. So it's a fun way to add some color and sparkle. Any other open questions before we dive into lots of tools today?
And then I also tried this, but I don't know. It's on page 163.
163. You're getting ahead of us. Are you doing flush settings? What?
Yes.
That's what we're covering. Yep, flush settings we're covering. Oh, those are a little bit high is my guess. So we're going to be covering that today, is flush
Okay.
settings. So you're just a little bit ahead of us.
Okay. Well, I just figure I was on a roll.
Good.
If I messed up 1 and 2, go for 3.
That's awesome. So flush setting used to be one of my most hated, and a few little tweaks to how I learned about them. It's one of those ones I've taken the class for flush setting from multiple instructors because everybody has a slight variation on it. And John's, I was just not getting consistent results. So I'll have a couple of tips for what some other folks have said that has helped me out a lot on that. But once you get it, it sort of like clicks all of a sudden, but until you get it, you got scratches everywhere, you got ugly little lines, you got stones falling out. It's frustrating, and then suddenly it isn't anymore. It's one of the weirdest evolutions for a setting. You know, it's once you've learned it, it's like riding a bike. You're not going to forget the basics of it once they click. But before we get to that, we're going to do the star setting variation, which is the last setting in chapter, what chapter are we in? Chapter 5. So we are going to be on page 149, starting on the right-hand column. And we have a whole bunch of tools we have to make sure are ready to go for this. This setting is based entirely off of the last setting we did, where we did the bead setting. But John, because he's just given us all the steps for bead setting, John gives us almost no order of operations in this particular write-up. So I'm going to interpret what I think the order of operations is supposed to be based on the sort of scant detail he's given us. We are going to prep our stones whole the same as we would have for a basic bead setting, meaning that we're going to do a small drill hole, make it a little bigger with a regular drill bit. Then we're going to move to a flame burr, or if you don't have a flame burr, or also called a bud burr, then you could do it with a round burr. And then we move to our setting burr that is just the size of the stone or slightly smaller, never larger. So we're going to do all of that cut in prep, just like we did for the last bead setting, and also just like we're about to do when we get to flush setting, except we go a little deeper with a flush setting. So the principles are all going to stay the same base, but we are not yet going to make our beads. The next step in bead setting would be to cut those beads and then use the beading tool to round them out. But we're going to wait on that, and we use our 3 different gravers to cut in the star before or 2 different gravers to cut in the star, and then we use our 3rd graver, the one that we used last time, to cut in the beads and set the stone. So the stone doesn't sit in place while we're doing the cutting of the star. We don't want to scratch across it by accident or whatever. It only goes in after we're ready, but we do need to have it well positioned before we do our cut in, because it's what drives the positioning of it. And there's one super important note on page 150. I think it's on 150. Let me see. Yeah, the very last paragraph is an important note that has a sort of a subtle nuance to it. Use the same, once we have cut in our star, we're going to have little vestiges of metal hanging off of the edges of where we've cut. So we're going to use the exact same burr that we end up using for sizing and set our stone setting burr, but we are not putting it in our drill. Or if we are, we're putting it we're putting it in a hand drill or something like that, or it's like a pin vise, because we're going to do this deburring very lightly with just a turn of it with our fingers, or with a small handle on it. So if you were to go back and drill, you'll ravage the edges of your star. Potentially. So that's, just make note of that as the important finish step, because I always forget that and go back to the actual flex shaft, and then it opens it up too wide, or it tears at the star. So I want to review those pictures that are on page 150, because one of the most critical things, as I've said on these small settings, a lot of it is the patience to do it in steps, which we all know just how patient I am. Right. So it's doing it in stages is the important part on this one. Letting the tool do the work for you rather than battling and digging in, right? And that all starts with the patience to properly sharpen our tools. So let's go. I've already demoed a couple times the sharpening, but I'm going to do it again because we are finally actually using our Arkansas stone. So as a reminder for this one, we're using multiple tools. This is the 4, which is going to be putting in the initial cut into the stars, creating the line that we'll be following. And then we're going to move to the 42, which is the flat graver. So we're doing onglet and then flat. And then only when we're ready to do the beading will we go back to the number 52 round that we did last time. Right. So it's a lot of variety and they all need sharpening, with one of them needing the extra step of the Arkansas stone on it. Okay. So the sharpening technique is still one where you're making that triangle with your fingers and thumb to control and slow and steady do your sharpen, keeping it as straight as you can. And then checking on the back of your thumb to make sure it catches that thumbnail, not your thumb. If it does, then do a couple taps into wood to get the little bit on the end blunted off. So that one, my onglet is in good shape. It happens that I've been sharpening these before we got on because I didn't want to sit here for hours on screen sharpening. And then I'm going to also do the same thing to my round. So again, creating the triangle to make sure that I am going at the shape, at the direction that I want, or use one of those angle positioning tools. And I again find that the left right means that I'm going to stay slower than if I go longwise, but whatever works for you. This is just reminding me to go slow and steady instead of rushing the attempt. And then check your, that one's not quite there. I'm going to do that a little bit more. Remember that this needs to be oiled on this stone. Over time, your stone will have enough oil soaked into it that it won't need as much put on it. But this is such a new stone that I got for the project because my other stones are sort of worn. Still a little bit less than I'd like.
And again, what is your preferred oil?
I'm using 3-in-1. John talked about the benefits and detriments of using like a wintergreen oil. It's just too much pungent. I bought some and then was reminded that I don't like the smell of it either. I used to use it in chocolate making and it would get all over the place. I think linseed oil is another recommended one. I'm not a fan of the smell of the 3-in-1, but I do it so infrequently that, you know, I wash my hands and it goes away after I'm done. Okay, that's better. And then the last one that I'm going to do is my flat, my square cut. So the number 42, which is going to be our bright cut. And this, remember, is the one that we use when we're doing a bright cut finish on our standard bezel settings, our step bezels, the heavier gauge that we were doing in chapter 3 or 4, whatever it was. Must have been 3. And this is the one that I find the hardest to keep clean because it's really easy to distort the front edge and have it be a little bit skewed. But it's also one of the best indicators of, are you keeping things straight? I'm tending to float a little bit more to one side than the other. I'm tending to tip a little, I'm going to exaggerate. I'm tipping a little bit more this way than that way. And so I need to do a little countering to that. Because then I should end up with a fairly straight top edge. Better. Let's see how that is for sharpness. Okay, good sharpness. Tapping it in the wood. I'm gonna put that stone aside and move to the Arkansas stone. And now I'm working the opposite little blunt edge of it. So I was sharpening the long angle. Now I'm just pulling back along this. And this is one that the visual is going to be really important. So I'm going to do one up in the air so that you guys can see it a little better. Your drawdown should be as wide as the front of the, as the shape of your blade. If you're doing this right, it should make tracks that are the width of the piece. If it's not, you're probably tipping to one side or the other, as I am presently doing. So what am I missing here? There we go. Better. And so we're just drawing downward to get a sharp pull on that. And one of the things here that I can see, let me see if I can zoom in enough that you guys can see the gleam. Where am I going here? There we go. So you'll see that my little end piece here is not perfectly straight across, which is what the ideal is. It's got a little bit of a tilt to the angle. That's because I'm not doing as clean a draw with my level as I should be. So I'm going to go and try to clean that up a little bit. And I'm still not going to get it perfect because I do not do this every day, but I can get it better.
Are you working on number 4?
I am working on the 42, which is the square. Oop, I'm not
Okay.
clean. There we go. See that, the flat? And I'm working the back of it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So what we're doing is we're putting a high polish on that. And once I've got the Arkansas stone step done, I'm going to get the, I did like it came in today as if it was destiny, my crocus paper order. I'm going to take some crocus paper, which is basically fabric, sandpaper that's been infused with a polishing compound. And let me zoom back out so you guys can actually see this a little better. And I'm just going to pull that same exact surface, the little surface that I was just polishing, down this until it gets a shine to it. I want smooth mirror finish on that little spot on the back. So let me zoom back in so you guys can see the bling. Hopefully you can see that little flash at the top of polish. So you see how that tip is nice and shiny? That's what we're aiming for. This is the cutting edge. This is the edge that we want to run smoothly along. And that's what does the bright in the bright cut, is that it's a clean. So what it's doing is it's burnishing from the back at the same time as it's cutting in from the front. And that's why we want this high polish. Same principle of why you polish your hammers before you start forging, right? So I'm just going to clean that up a little bit, wipe off some of the excess oil, because boy, did I overdo it a little bit too much on this. And we're going to put that one aside because our first step is to prep the hole. And let's see, where do we want to be? A little further out. Is that good visual for you guys? Right there. Okay, so this is the same plate I did last time, the bead setting, and then the fancier bead setting with multiples. I just had gridded it out and put my initial drill holes down. So I just used a fine hole drill, a fine bit rather, for the holes on that. And now I'm going to step it up a little bit and use progressively bigger bits. Oops, I've already got my bit in. There we go. Sure, I use my burr life. And just straight up, finding my pilot holes, making sure it's not over one of my pegs. Come here. Remembering to back off a little bit so that the chaff can come back out. Every once in a while, you got to pull your drill bit back up and letting the bit do the work. Just going to drill a few of these so we have some to play with. Because again, if you're prepping your plate and you're using all the same size practice stones for these various small settings, just go ahead and make your whole plate because they're all gonna start with that initial drill. And then only hold off the final step using the setting burr to the very end. If you've got a drill press, you can put it on the press and get all of your plate mapped out.
What size is your drill bit?
I think I'm using a 56 right now, and then I'll move up to a 60. I had already done something that was probably around a 48 just for the pilot holes. But it's going to depend on the stone size you're using, right? Your final hole needs to be small enough that your stone has room to be set after that. 2, one more out here. Put 2 side by side. It's like they're dulling because I'm looking at them. I'm going forward. I am. Yes. Good Lord, this is taking a bit to get through. Go. All right, that's 3. That'll be good enough for that. And then I'm going to bump up a step to the next side and to a couple sizes up to open that hole a little bit more. Remember, at your smaller bits, you may want to trim off some of the body of the bit just to give yourself a little more leeway, a little more control. Go that one quickly.
Are you using a larger drill bit or are you using the bud?
So I'm still using a larger bit. I've done 3 sizes of drilling. I went from my prep one that I did before I got to you guys. I went from itty bitty pilot hole. So I did my punch to get a starter mark. And then I went tiny, up a few steps, up a few steps more. Does that show? There we go.
Okay, thank
Got
you.
it? So it's just, I mean, sure, you could fight with it to go all from the larger bit, but it's going to be less controlled for you if you're doing that. It's a way to make it easier. You saw how much easier it was for me to do that final step because of the middle step that I had put in play. So it's really how much can you control it. And I am using calibrated manufactured stones for this one. I'm using these little, I think they're simulated tourmaline or something like that. And they are 3.5 millimeters. So I have chosen a bud burr that is just under that size. You can, with a bud burr, with careful bit control. I'm going to scoot out a little bit more because I keep moving out of screen for you guys. There we go. You can go with a bigger bud burr and just not go as far down the burr, but so this is one of those burrs that if you can only buy a few of them, that's okay. Whereas the stone setting burrs are worth spending money to get every one of the ranges that you can get. I in fact have multiple brands because some of them do the 0.1s and some of them do the 0.2s. So I'm going to switch to the bud burr. I'm going to switch if I can get my switch to switch. There we go. Still with the burr life. I'm just going to do one of these for right now. This is catching.
I'm sorry, Rachel, what size did you say your bud burr was?
So I got a bud burr that is, I think it's 3.4 something.
Okay,
No, it's a little bigger than that. 3.6, I think. I'm just not going all the way down.
okay.
I'm going about 2/3 of the way down at this point is my guess. I just need to make it the initial hole for the stone. The goal of using a bud burr, or again, you can use a ball burr if you don't have bud burrs, is to give it a round cavity that is going to be just right for the stone to settle in on. Way away from my stone size. So I'm going to going with the bud burr until this can rest in that spot. My flex shaft is behaving badly today. Bear with me, guys. I got to adjust a couple of things. I move that further out. May have to do some repairs on my flex shaft line. Closer. Almost. Slow it down a little bit.
What are you looking for?
Pardon?
What are you looking for? The table to be even with the sheet?
So it's going to depend on the size of the stone, whether the table will be even with it or slightly below it. What I'm looking for is for it to be resting in the hole I'm making, but not have wiggle room. That precision becomes even more critical as we move into flush setting, because we need a snap fit if we can get it. And the truth is, the bud burr is just a good starting point. So if you're close to seeing it set in, you could switch to the setting burr at this point. You just don't want to go beyond the size you need here. So I'm going to probably stop there. Yeah, that's just where I want it. And then we're going to switch to the setting burr. And this setting burr is exactly the size of the stone or slightly smaller, never larger. Never larger. And in a perfect world, you'll be doing a direct up and down, like you need to be straight down on top of this. And it will be easier if you do it in a flex shaft. I mean, in a drill press to keep it upright, but it's worth practicing. If you're having a really hard time getting these nice and upright, some people have an easier time locking their flex shaft in this direction and working perpendicular to it. It sort of depends on my mood is the way I would put it. Okay, so now I'm looking to have the stone set inside. Now, this is actually a perfect fit for a flush setting, but I'm going to want it a little bit deeper down for what we're going to do with the bead by just a hair. For me, the flush setting is right where your fingernail can just catch the edge of the piece of the stone, or just so that there's a little gap between the stone and the, or a little catch point between the stone and the edge of the metal. So just that tiny little amount more. And our stone now fits nice and flush. I'm going to zoom in for you guys again to see if we can get you a good visual of just how flush it's going to be. Because again, like if I were doing a flush setting, I'd be a happy camper right now on this one. Oop, too close. So you can see the table does stick out ever so slightly above it because it's a tall stone, you know, because it's a larger stone. If it were shorter, it might be level with this. Hope I said that right. If it was shorter, if it was smaller, it would be more level with it. But the bigger the stone, the more of the table that's going to hit above the ridge line, I guess I would call it. So this is barely a bump. Like it's not even, it's about the same amount of bump as I did on last times. But I've got it set there, so I know it's a good fit. I'm now going to pull the stone again and put it aside. That is the prep work that we're doing before we do this cut. Now you guys are going to have to tell me how close I need to be for you to see but not lose some of the action when I'm doing my graver work. With my number 4 first. Here's my number 4. Yes.
Can you go in?
Before you do your graver,
Yeah.
Can you measure the actual opening, what you just did with the ball burr? Or
I can
with
try. I don't know if my tools are precise enough for that, but let's see.
Because I'm just trying to get an idea in terms of openings.
So for a 3.5 millimeter stone, yeah, this is not a very good reading. Hang on. It looks like I'm at 3.51 millimeter wide for a 3.5 millimeter stone. There's going to be a little variation on any stone around the circumference of it, but that's like, you want it fingernail catch level and less if I could get it. If I could have that at exactly 3.5, it would be the perfect fit for a flush set, because then we would actually hear the snap as it gets pushed into place. For this setting, because I have to pull the stone and then do some things, having it not snap is okay. So that 3.5, the tiny little bit is worth the setting. I mean, is worth the setting.
Yeah, it's almost the same size as the stone then.
Right. And as you get better at this, you'll get more precise. And as you get better quality burrs is the big thing. Like this and files are the two things that you spend money to get the good stuff instead of going cheap. And the gravers. Cheap gravers, I tried that route. Not a good call. So any other questions before I start the graver work on this?
You were talking about going in a little bit closer. Is there any way you can just try to get in just a tad closer?
Closer on the Zoom. Yes. I was like,
Yeah.
what am I getting closer? Is that still what I'm worried about, is not having you see the movement of the piece. Is that close enough without being like, can you see enough of the work?
I think so.
Okay.
How about everybody else? Is that okay? Looks good to me.
Well, let's wait until she starts.
So this is the number 4. This is the nope, that's the number 52. This is the number 4. Has a nice sharp but curved front point. And we're going to start a little bit ways back. And we're not going too deep. We're doing a cut in with that wiggle. So again, we're keeping a steep angle. And all our goal is to follow the lines that I laid out to get my little star. Whoop. It's okay, because we're going to start back a little ways and pick it back up. And you'll need less wiggle for this. It'll be more of a push and less of a wiggle as you go through it in stages. So that first wiggle was just to catch me. And now I can just straight up cut my line, getting a little deeper every pass. And from John's pictures on page, what is it, 150, you'll see that this is his showing the staged digging down towards the front of the stone. So we're making the initial path of the star cut. And you try to make each pass in a whole one. You don't want that little skip that I did at the beginning if you can help it. And it's going to just get easier and easier to peel a little layer of material away. Already it looks kind of star-like, right? Because it's making that little sharp, crisp thing in there. And then I'm going to do the one opposite it. Little wiggle to catch it. Get that first pass. Second pass, I don't really need to wiggle. I'm just going to do multiple passes to create my progressively deeper as it goes towards the front of the stone pass. For me, the hard thing is not to go sliding past. It means I'm pushing too hard and jamming up my other side. So small amount of push, controlled effort. Already it's looking blingy. See how steep the angle of my graver is for this set. I'm really just taking a surface pass to scrape across. And when I say it matters, the quality of your graver and the sharpness of your graver, this one, you will feel it if it's not right. It will absolutely fight you.
So when you say fight you, when you skip too many times, is that when you know that you need to resharpen?
Yeah, if you're skidding, if you're catching, if it's not giving you like what is probably not showing up to you guys is that I get a little coil of material off of each pass. Like I've taken, if you've ever watched a fine woodworker take the last shavings off of a finish, you know, when they're working the last step of a delicate piece of woodwork, it's those kinds of shavings that we're getting once we do the second, you know, once we're on that second pass, after we set a trail for ourselves, then there's this little coil of material that's coming off each pass I make. And you'll see it start to break, or you'll see it not be as complete. And I'm trying to brace myself a little bit with each pass, so there's very nominal hand movement on my part for these. Like even this last set that I'm doing, I would do well to pause and sharpen right now because these were easier than these two. So I'm going to do a quick touch up. Again, judged by whether it catches. This still catches, but it's sort of loosening a little bit from where it was. And there was a reference in the book that implied that the more you file down your gravers, the easier it will be to resharpen them each time, based on the material for some reason. I don't know whether it's that it follows the angle more easily after you've done more passes. But somewhere there was a reference to that. A bit more. Or maybe it was on a group that I was on for engravers. I can't remember. The implication was that more work on the graver over time, it becomes a smoother cut. Yeah, so I can see just from that little bit of sharpening that I'm getting a cleaner run, except I'm still pushing too hard. If I'm pushing too hard, it may be because I'm going more down than I realize. So I'm catching too much material on a pass. Doesn't hurt to do this. John says he does 3 or 4 passes, but it doesn't hurt to do more controlled passes if you're having a hard time getting that depth. And I just want to go back to my first one. It looks a little shallower than my others. Touch that up a little bit more. I think we're looking good. So there we have our first pass of the star using the number 4. I'm glad. Let me zoom in for you guys on that one. Oops, that's the wrong direction, Rachel. So all we've done is cut in our paths. And it's shallower at the outer edges than it is towards the center. Right? So now we switch to our number 42, the flat or the square. Back out so you guys can see this again. Side. All right, and now we start to work the sides of it, and we've got a tiny little V channel in here. We're going to work one side with the flat graver against it, and then the other side of that V. So I'm going to angle it across the V one direction, and then across the V the other direction. And again, not a lot of push. We want to just let the graver do the work. And you should see the star point sort of deepening and shining up. If it's not shining up in the course of you making these passes, you may not have gotten a full enough polish on the bottom edge. Okay, so we've widened the star from 2 different angles. The point from 2 different angles. Got a little bit of sloppiness in the middle on this, probably from the number of passes I did with the other graver. Let's see if I can clean that up a little bit. Go. Side opposite it. So I'm taking a little bit more away at the inner side of it to sort of enhance that star spike. And each pass is, again, like that woodworker's tool with the, it's not called a rasp, the planer. We're using, this is our version of a planing tool. I use sort of the top point of the star as the start the push, but it gets deeper and more complete as we get down towards the front, because we're trying to follow and enhance that angle to make the star sparkle.
The bright cut.
Bright cut, yep, that's why we did the high polish on the back. This is starting to fight me a little bit. I may need to touch up my polish for this last one, but you can see already it's getting star-like and blingy, and you're not limited to 4. You know, you could do 6. You got to leave room for the beads is the big thing. If you're touching up in the middle, make sure that you do all the steps you need to do for this one. So go to the Arkansas stone. Do the draw down.
You know, I found not the China oil, but I found something, it's called honey oil. And I
Yeah.
just got it
From
at the
Gun-
hardware store.
Yep.
And it doesn't have a bad smell.
Oh, nice.
I just got it yesterday. Where is it?
Yeah, machinist oil, hunting oil, there's a whole bunch of choices for it. If it's used for gun works, it's usually pretty good for metal work in general. You know, our tumblers are used by hunters who make their own shot and that sort of thing.
Right. I haven't oiled my guns lately, but I'm just joking. Where is it?
So I'm going to touch up 1 or 2 of these that didn't quite balance out as cleanly. Some of them are a little less angled than others. Get a little more bling in there. I think we're looking pretty darn good here. You can go as deep or as little carving as you want. And you can see already we've got some nice sparkle there. We're going to bring it in though and see if you can see why we now need to do the hand drill. See if I can get close enough that you guys would be able to see the little chaff that's in there. So sort of, you can see it along the bottom edge there. There's a little bit of extra chaff right up there from the cut work that we've done, which is why we now take our same exact size setting burr and come back through and just twist. Or I usually do better with these in a hand piece, even if it's leaving it in your flex shaft hand piece and just using that to control the spin. Oops, except for when I've got it too loose.
Bring it down just a tad, Rachel.
Oh, thank you. Let me zoom out. So if I need to, I can put it in my hand piece. Now that's gonna spin on me. It's not gonna do it. Let me see where my other hand piece is. In here. None of these want to come out today. There we go. Yes. Just give myself a little bit of a handle. And a couple of spins to get the excess junk out of there. Okay, so now we've got a good clean star cut, and I'm gonna actually wipe down so you can see how truly blingy this gets. Get the junk out of there. So you can see it's got a lot of nice sparkle to it, right? All right, so now we are ready to put our stone back in, having cleaned out the extra junk that was in the way. Should be a nice fit because we already did that. Already looking cool with that stone in there. And we're ready to switch gravers once more. So we're switching now back to the one we used last time for our bead setting, which is the number 52. And this is the bead that we're doing from just outside. We're doing the lift bead, the lift stitch, not the whole run it along the length stitch. So we're starting sort of a millimeter or so outside of stone, and we're going in, and this is that wiggle, 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 because our goal is to raise some material that will push against the stone. And I'm doing it in between two of the stars, and I'm going to do a little bit on one side and a little bit on another, just to make sure that on the opposite side, to make sure that it's not moving out of place on me as I do that wiggle, wiggle. And then I'll go back and do a little more on that first one. And then our opposite sides. So now I've got my 4 lifted stitches. I'm going to go find my appropriately sized setting punch, which is going to be pretty darn small on these guys. Not setting punch. I need my beading tools. That's what I needed. Where did I put my beading tools? I had them out. I was cleaning up because my studio was a mess from this weekend. Where did I put the beading tools? There you go. Oh. Bear with me, gang. Apologies. I thought I had the right box out, but I do not. Where did I put the beading tools after last session? There it is. So I'm going to look for one that is ever so slightly bigger than the little blips that I brought up, but not too much bigger, because then it'll cut into things. Let me go for that one and see how that looks. Good. And on top of that bead, doing a little rotation and a little push down. Get it all bright and shiny. Opposite side. And you're going to always want to test and see if you can pull it back out after that, which looks like we're in pretty good shape, although I want to clean up one of these beads a little bit more. So 2 of them are a little lopsided. Go. And we have a star setting. Is that still in screen for you guys? Yes.
Yay.
So it's a fun little blingy one. Trying to figure out what I can do. This. Let me bring this in, and it may show better without my light. Nope, the light is definitely needed. So there's our little star setting. And we can do a little careful polishing around it. Not a whole lot. Got to use some gentle tools. I'd probably cautiously use my either the bristles, the 3M bristle wheels very gently, or I might use my Swifty wheel very carefully, because that could take material off enough that the beads would come up. But it sparkles. I wish my camera was showing better how much it sparkles. Let's see if I can zoom any further for the actual setting.
Would you ever take a wheel and go into those?
I probably would be really careful about that, just because it's too easy to catch the bead. But maybe, yeah, I mean, other than, so maybe the Swifty angle cut, like I'd use a brand new one that has a sharper cut than this, or I'd file this to a nice sharp cut and try and be really controlled about it. But yeah, you're mostly counting on your polish coming from that burnishing of the back of the square, of the flat.
That's pretty deep.
It is, it's pretty deep, and it's pretty elegant when you get it right. This, I find these look more interesting with smaller stones than with bigger ones, but the decorative element, like you could put, there's nothing that says you can't put a star cut around a different type of setting. It's just not going to have quite the moving into the center of the stone effect without the bead technique. The bead setting will only work for sort of, I think he said up to 4 to at most 4.5 kind of range millimeter stones. If you go much bigger, the beads aren't going to be sturdy enough to hold it down. Any questions about that one, gang?
You could probably use a pin polisher if you really needed to shine those up, but they look pretty shiny from here.
Yeah, yeah. And if I took more time and went like microscopic scrapes across it and then polished and then polished my graver and then more scrapes and back and forth, I would probably get a little bit cleaner sparkle there to begin with. But yeah, it's a fun little setting. And I personally am kind of bored by 4-pointers. I like odd numbers. I think they're more interesting visually. So a 3 with 3 beads is enough to hold the stone, or go to 6 maybe, or 5 and play around with it. Just lay out your even spacing, or nothing says it actually has to be even, like 1 on one side and 2 offset to that, so that you've got a sort of a V pattern out of it is a cool way to look. So play around with the variations and see what they look like all close up to each other. Sometimes you'll want to put, if you're doing a set of them, you might want to put your star points going opposite each other. So like the points of one star point at the beads of another, and they then flip-flop opposite each other. I don't know if that's making any sense at all. But try different variations and have fun with this one. And be careful with your gravers, as Carmen found. This one, it really does need the movement of the graver ball, but you're not working as ferociously across the material as you are with a stitch, where we're really putting that force to get the stitch to lift. So these are a little gentler on you and a little more controlled. And you saw, I hope you were able to see that I held my hands really at that, oops, wrong way. I was really supporting my hand when I was working the graver. So I was trying to do as much as I could to support and have a controlled push rather than forcing my whole hand across it. Oh, wrong way again. So rather than doing this across it, I was in very close and controlled and supportive, using almost that triangulation thing on a lot of that activity. Anything else on that one? Okay. Let's talk flush setting. For me, flush setting is one of those add-on features. Like, I don't tend to do it as a center stone concept very much, but you can, absolutely. I like to use it as a little extra decorative element alongside of other things. If you're doing hollow forms and you want to do flush set, try to remember that you need to have enough support and a thick enough piece of metal that you're not going to be denting it as you push in, because it does take a fair amount of downward force. Or you need to put stabilizers underneath, like a piece of tubing inside of your hollow form, roughly where you're going to put it. So I will often do, instead of doing an actual flush set in a hollow form, what I would do is tube set, but the tube is hidden in the hollow form, so it looks like a flush set, basically. Either one works. It's a legitimate, that's sort of a cross between a tube set and a flush set. We do have to have thick metal for flush setting, because we are pushing it down into the metal solidly, and you don't want it poking out the other side. But John points out, we're skipping ahead a little bit into chapter 6 because we're skipping the wax working session until next time. So we're going to move to page 160 is where he starts to talk about it. And it is definitely, you want a strong stone. I tend to use sapphires for my flush set detail work, partially because you can get some phenomenal colors in it, so you have accents for just about everything, and partially because they're a good durable stone for this. You don't want a soft stone, and you don't want a very chippy stone if you can help it. And then the metal thickness thing, he shows us on page 162 that it doesn't have to necessarily be super thick metal to start. You could do it by layering metal and either do it underneath where it's hidden. For example, you could just solder on a jump ring below it to give it the extra meat it needs. Or you could work decoratively on top and create a component into which you are setting your flush setting. So he shows a little star cutout that he does for that kind of variation on the theme. He's also got some demonstrations here of being able to use a heart burr instead of the series of burrs that we've just used. So he talks about it more than actually using it, because he still reverts to using the he does one of two things. I've seen him teach it two different ways. He either does exactly the same series of burrs we just did, and so your final cut is with the step burr, the setting burr, or he uses exclusively a ball burr. And he has pictures, I think, in the book about how it would look when it's set on around. Yeah, he does on page 164. He shows that how it would look visually inside if you were to set it using only the ball burr, because it gives a consistent, guaranteed height at which your stone is going to sit, because the round can't do anything but a consistently round hole. So if you're having a really hard time, if you're getting a lot of your stones looking tipped after you've done this with a standard setting burr, try doing the round burr method instead and see if that gets you more control over it. For me, the downside of the round is that it also has more opportunity to tilt in, like to move on you, than when there's a solid seat for it that you get from the setting burr. So I have, from what little I've dabbled with the round version, I'll do it more out of desperation of not having the right size burr than I will out of wanting that as a setting, but whichever one works for you. The end goal is as snug a fit as possible, aiming for that beautiful snap. You won't get it every time, but if you don't start getting it after a while, you need to go out and get more sizes of burrs, and you need to do your measuring more carefully. And you need to just take your time a little bit more and get that precision fit. It's spin the drill bit a couple times, test it for size. Spin the drill bit a couple times, test it for size. Precision is the key on this one. So with that in mind, we also need to have a tool with which to set this. And John gives us directions in the book on making one out of an old burr. I had to go digging and find one that I didn't care about breaking because I didn't have any old burrs. So I'm going to try and show that process in a hurry for us. But I've just taken it. It does have to be a solid burr. It can't be a hollow. Some of the like spinning wheel burrs and so on are on a hollow frame. It needs to be a solid one, and it needs to be steel. And we're going to just basically do a little grinding and filing and chop some stuff off of this. Am I on screen? I am on screen. So I'm just cutting the very end of this off. Oops, but I don't want the dust in my regular tray. There it is, not hollow. And we're gonna anneal it. He anneals it because he doesn't mind that it is soft. He just points out that it's going to periodically need some repolishing. So I'm gonna hop, oops, but I did not set up my camera over there. So bear with me a second while I turn that on. Ooh, that looks really weird. Hang on, something's not quite right. What have I got going on? Sorry, I don't mean to make you guys dizzy. Does that look normal to you guys? Not distorted anymore?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's good.
Good. All right, so with steel, it's all about the color, and he's talked in the section on putting handles on your gravers. He talks about the color spectrum that you worry about when you're annealing. I'm just going to do a rough anneal at this point, not stress too much over it, because we just want to do some filing down. And I will never remember the color change spectrum. It's a rainbow hue that you care about, but I'm just annealing the bottom. I never remember which is the layer I care about, the colors I care about, without looking at a chart. So I'm going to let this cool naturally, because steel does the opposite of silver. You don't quench it to further soften it. You want to just let it cool. I'm just going to put it down on some other steel so it cools off for a moment. And then you can use a grinder, you can use files, but use really junky files if you're going to do this. Because you're, again, grinding steel with steel. And cooled off on me? No, not quite. Okay, let's switch back over. So I'm using my super duper 90-cent cheapo file from Captain Tinkham's Emporium in Maine, which is sadly no longer there. It's related to the giant tool barn there called Liberty Tools, which if you ever get to Liberty, Maine, is worth a half a day, because that's how long it'll take you to get through everything, to just browse through their old tools. So we're just putting a bit of a point on this, not a sharp point. I'm just curving it as I go. Sort of a blunted curve is what we're looking for. So I'm roughing it in, and then I'm going to get my sandpaper board out, do a bunch of cleanup on this, going progressively finer. Just rolling it as I sand rather, to try and keep that rough curvature to it. Because ultimately we want a high polish on this. This again is behaving as our burnisher. So just like we want a clean, smooth finish on burnishing tools, we need this one to do the same. Okay, get in there. Use a little bit more roundness on the end. I'm going to see if the crocus cloth will do this. Otherwise, I'm going to have to go over to my polishing wheel and do a little Tripoli action on this to get the final polish. I'm hoping that the crocus paper will do the trick. So I guess doing pretty well. So I've now got a nice smooth, blunt tipped, little bit of a point there. I could even go a little smaller than this potentially. I'm going to show you one that I've gone all the way to blunting. Figure out where I put it a moment ago. Look it out for the sake of switching. There it is. So there's a profile of one that I worked on for a while. I used the grinder just to get a steeper angle on this one. But we're looking for a little round, high polished tip by the time we're done. I'm going to just polish this one up a little bit. And then you want it in some kind of manageable handle. I'm going to switch back to what I had it in a moment ago. These pin vices are pretty inexpensive. But you could also, if you wanted to make it more permanent, you could put it into one of the wood handles. Whatever's comfortable for you. I tend to like a more pencil-like shape for this particular setting. The ball, it doesn't give me as much control on the grip. And what this is going to give us is something that we will be winding around and around our stone, scribbling around in a circle. Because the way that this setting works, way that this setting works is the softness of the silver is basically bullied down and hardened around the stone. So we start with our material like this. Hole in there all the way down, but you get the gist. We start with our material like this, with our stone sitting just below There's a little tiny amount of lip. This is that fingernail catch that I keep talking about. That happens right about there, right? A tight fit to the stone. Right, so we've got our nice faceting showing up at the top and our table up there. And what we will be doing is pushing their color out of colors. There we go. Is pushing right here, basically, and pushing it down and in. So it has to go somewhere when we push down with the steel. So if we were to look at that writ large, it would start life like this on the wall with the stone waiting here for it. And when we push down, it's distorting just enough that it creates this little blip that pushes over the stone. So our stone would be here, right? And all we're doing is an angle that's going to get this metal pushed, which is going to start life a little bit like that, and then gradually circle around a little bit higher up so that we're then spinning around the channel that we've made. So if you're looking at it from the top, we would have a tiny little channel that we have created right at the boundary of the stone by pushing that metal down. The pushing down, the burnishing, all of that hardens the material around it, and the tiny amount being pushed in, because we have done a good job of fitting our stone, which is the only way this will work, because it's so tight, ideally with that little snap, means that any push that we do to the material, even this tiny little bit of overhang that's created, is what holds this in place. Okay. Conceptually, it's a simple setting. Practically, it's got a couple challenges to it, because you got to get the right angle. You've got to have a high enough polish on your setting tool that you are actually burnishing as you go. And it's easy to slip because it's a tiny, tiny setting. So it's easy to be getting in your action and going on the rotation, and then it goes off track. So your first few, and even mine on this, are likely to be sloppy. They're likely to have scratch marks around them and so on. So let's set one of these flush settings right next to the one we just did. Let me get a different color stone though while I'm at it, so that we can see the comparison a little bit better. I'm going to pull out one of my green stones. And that's probably a little too tiny for you guys to see. Let's see, what else do I have? Maybe I don't have a lot of choices. So these can be done with the smallest stones you can manage. They don't hold for much more than, I think, the sort of 4 millimeter range is about the max you want to do. So I'm going to see what I've got in the 3.5 range. I'll do one of the dark blues this time. It's not a 3.5. Then I'll switch back to light blue. That is not. I gotta go down to a smaller size stone. I guess we're getting 2 light blues today. Okay, I have another one out. Where did I let it go? So I don't have that stone anymore, so find another one. All right, so we are going to use the same series of setting burrs that we used on the other setting there. Did I do the series? I did do the series. So we've already done our drill sizes on this one next door, so I don't need to use regular drill bits. I can go straight to my bud burr, or again, you could go to a round burr at this point. Either one is going to do the trick. Burr light screen. Right, here we go. And I want to get to the point where I'm checking this frequently. I'm getting close. Okay, a little bit more, and then we'll switch to our setting bar. Again, the flame burr is just to start the seat, and then it's going to be cleaned up by using the setting burr, or again, a round burr will work too. And in this case, we want to really focus on getting just the basic depth, no deeper. Meaning we would like it to just brush below the surface. So as
The
soon as
table.
pardon?
The table
The table. Well,
Or-
so the
or the
again,
girdle?
it's gonna depend on the size of the stone. The table, it's not the table, it's the girdle that you want just below. And that'll sometimes the table will be above the surface, and sometimes it'll be just at the surface when you do that, depending on the size of your stone. The smaller your stone, less of it will be showing above the setting itself. I don't know if I said that well enough to make sense. What we're doing is getting our snap will come from the girdle just popping below the top surface of the metal. And I'm very, very close to that point, so I need to check often. Not quite a snap, but close to it. Like 2 more turns, 3 more turns. There we go. Not a snap, but a good fit, I would say. Let me wipe this down with alcohol so you guys can see it a little clearer, because it's gotten awfully dusty. So once again, I have just the material I can feel that I can catch my fingernail on just below the surface. Right? And if I see it tilted at this stage of the game, I need to stop and get it lined up better. I need to maybe go back to use a ball burr instead, because if it's tipped here, it's going to be tipped by the time we're done. But I want as snug a fit as I can manage. Next, we're going to take our burnishing tool that we've polished up nicely, and we're going to come in at this steep angle. And we may have to hold the stone a little bit just so it doesn't wobble around if it's not a perfect snap. But all I'm doing is I'm brushing, pushing towards the stone, the edge of the metal. At one side, I'm pushing it down a little bit with a little scraping motion back and forth. And I'm going to the opposite side and doing the same thing, pushing down a little bit, making just a little bit of a lip over. Doing my north, south, east, west, and I'll do these 4 and then I'll zoom in for you guys to see how little I'm doing. Trying not to scrape the stone, but rather the edge of the metal itself, right where it comes up against the stone. I put my glasses down. Okay, so zooming in for this. Oop, too far. Can you see where it's slightly shinier at those 4 points? That's how little I've pushed in, is just enough to grab it. Right? Because what we're doing is similar to when we're setting prongs, we're pushing a tiny amount of metal in to stabilize it, before we go into the bigger act of setting the whole thing. Okay, questions? All right, we move on, and I'll see if I can do this. Probably I need to back out a smidge for you guys. There we go. See if we can do this with that level of visibility to you, because this is the magic. So now that I've got pushed down on those spots, I'm going to try to take a slightly steeper angle, but now gentle rotation all the way around the stone. So I was doing my first squishes at this angle. I've moved up to about a 45 just to do a pass. And this is where you're going to first start to get those scratches until you get control over it. And I'm going to gradually put more pressure as once I've got a channel that I know I'm not going to slip out of. I'm putting that pressure down, and I'm gradually getting more and more upright with my action to the end where I sort of want to do almost straight up and down, burnishing down. And if you see any movement by the time you're here, your seat was cut too big for the stone. This should be locked in by the time, actually, frankly, by the time you've got your 4 positions in. But this is what makes sure it's not going anywhere. So just around and around, downward action. And we are set. Boom. You'll see that pretty little shiny bright channel all the way around it, ideally with no little scratches. But if you do get them, you can, this is a great one to clean up using the Swifty wheel, especially if you have one of the angle cut Swifty wheels. You can just get in right at the edge. Oops, that's not going to fit there though. Let's see what else I've got. It must have been running through Swifty wheels this week with what I was working on. There it is. No, it's just not going to fit in that. There. I really wish they'd make a quick change handpiece that handles the larger sizes of burrs and mandrels.
Wouldn't that be nice?
It really would.
Yeah.
So I can just, one of the reasons I like the Swifty is that it doesn't injure stones. Might as well see about the bright cut cleanup while I'm there. Boom. Flush setting. So for that, again, this is one of those ones that I swear to you, you'll have dozens of, you hate them because they're scratched or they're not level. And then one day you'll wake up and you'll do one and it'll be perfect. And from there on out, you'll get what it was, the subtle differences in how you were controlling your tools. Oop, let me go in closer. That'll make the difference for you on understanding that bright cut. I mean, that flush set that you got to get. Another great one for close together settings. You just have to plan your drill holes out and make sure you have just enough material to go around the edge. But it's a strong setting as long as you don't go too big with your stone. And it's a great inexpensive additive element to another piece. So, questions?
I want to learn how to do that.
Absolutely. Practice, practice, practice. Same way you get to Carnegie Hall. And again, it's the angles. So John doesn't go into a whole lot of description in his about different angles. He tends to do sort of a one shot and then upright. For me, it was that change to the controlled pressure as I'm moving from I do a steep angle for the small positioning step, and then a slightly steeper angle, 45-degree angle for getting my first pass. But he goes in his book, he goes from sort of that one steep angle all the way to upright. And I was skidding all over the place until I got that tiny little change for my initial setup, until I have a channel, and then I can go straight at it the way that John is describing in the book with the pictures.
So did you do that angle? Because I did that angle and it just made it huge. And I even messed up my heartburn.
Did that, what do you mean? So the angle of the
on page 163, where you just
163
on the top.
Oh, so yeah, I don't use the heart burrs for those. If you can, more power to you. I've never caught the magic of how do you cut under and pop in. So it's not something I use that for. We're going to use the heart burr when we get to the faux channel setting. But I can't pop it in and out properly. So that's why I use the setting burr that he describes on the right hand column of the page. But again, you could use the heart burr, you could use the setting burr, you could use the round burr. Maybe it's worth on your test plate trying all three, like create a scenario where you set them up side by side and mark them and do them all with the same size stone and see whether you see any difference in control, in sizing, in that, whether you can get a good snap fit. The benefit of the heart, if you can get good at it, is that it lets you get that snap more often. You're not going to, it's more likely that you'll get a snap because it's an undercut. Of course, if you've got a brittle stone, it's more likely that you'll get a chip if you've got an undercut too. So, but play with the various setting burrs and use what you got. Better you would use a right-sized heart burr than a wrong-sized setting burr.
Right.
So,
okay.
Rachel,
yeah.
what about how much pressure were you exerting when you were going like this? Is that already
I can't see the like this. Let me remove my spotlight so I can see you. What's the like this?
like when you were going already at this? This was
The upright? I was putting a lot of pressure.
a lot of pressure?
A lot of pressure by then. Yeah, I start out with just a scribble for the little 4 points.
Right.
And you go to slightly more pressure in order to keep a control, but not a lot of pressure on that control, set up my channel. And then by the time I'm upright, because I'm not pushing down on the stone, that is a very important feature. You have to be working on the outside of the stone. This is all about straight down on the metal. There should be no burnishing of the stone. You're not even on metal that's on the stone. You're on metal that's just outside of the stone, because we're creating that pushed over wall. It's basically like if you step in a mud puddle and there's a lot, a sand puddle or something like that, the material pushes to either side of where you've stepped. That's the act we're doing by pushing straight down in that final stage, is we're going push that extra mud up and over the stone.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure. Any other questions?
Rachel, once again, the sheet of metal that you're using, the gauge.
What did I do? I think I did a 16 gauge, but it's going to be dependent on your stone height, right?
The height of the stone. Okay.
Yeah, because you don't want the coulette poking out, basically. So
Gotcha.
again, John shows a couple ways in the book. You can either build 2 layers up, so you could put a little star or a little cutout and give yourself the thickness, or you could put a jump ring underneath, or you just start with heavy metal.
Thank you.
And I think this was a 16, but let me check. Yeah, it looks like I've got 16 gauge for this plate. And that's with 3.5 millimeter, fairly well calibrated because they're manufactured. You know, they're not CZs, but they're lab created or simulated emerald sapphires. Any other questions?
Yes. Can you do that with ovals?
Yes, is the answer. You can do it with any shape if you can control the pressure downward. What you need is a complete circuit of the item. So the concept of holding it will do the trick. You can in fact do it with a square stone if you can get your seat cut well enough for it. So you need, whatever your shape, you need the seat, and an oval seat is a little harder to cut, right? And then you need to be able to have that full material band around it, because it is so little metal that the pressure is what's holding it in, that small lift of metal that we've got that compresses around it.
So if you were going to try and make a seat for an oval stone, would you use like 2 ball burrs, or would just, I mean, is there a trick to it, or you just have to
So
tough it
the
out?
answer is that it's not something I've played around with much, but
Okay.
if I were to approach it, I would probably do an initial pass with my drills and files to get the oval cutaway, and
Okay.
then I would leave plenty of material underneath where my stone is going to be, and then I would use a combination of either heart or setting burrs, but in a controlled run around the outside. And then I'd finish it with a barrel burr to make sure that my upright edges, the cut in that I've done, so that the setting burrs or the heart burrs will get me my angle of the seat.
Right.
And then
Right.
what I have to do is create the uprights of the walls. And so because it has to be such a snug fit, that is a much tighter activity, exercise of precision than if we were doing, say, the same exercises in a walled bezel, right? We have a little more leeway because we've got material that we're truly pushing over. And so if it's a little loose, as long as it sits well in the seat, it's not a big deal. This setting doesn't have that leeway. So yeah, you'd have to practice on cutting in the equivalent of what you'd get if you had a perfect round setting.
Great. Thank you.
Sure. If you do one, bring photos or show us, because I'm going to be excited to see it.
Well, don't hold your breath, but I'm going to try it.
I'm
Eventually.
pretty sure that Lucy Walker's series, she has both her basics on what we just did, but I think she may have a variation where she actually shows that on a square faceted stone, doing a flush set on it. But I can't remember. It was either her or somebody else that was doing lots of online videos who had a small square setting. And I've always sort of went, oh, that looks amazing. I'm never going to try that.
How do you think a trillium would work?
A trillion would be stunning, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
But again, your problem is getting that seat exactly to fit. It has to be snug. But yeah, I would go gaga for a well-seated flush set trillion. That would be stunning. A set of them all at different angles to each other. That's exciting. So
Okay.
if there are no other questions, then let me go over what we're going to do next time, and we'll do a little show and tell. I think I got through everything I wanted to. Yes, I did. Okay. So next session is March 15th, and it's going to be a complete different approach to stone setting, because you're going to watch me carve the wax ring. I don't think I have my sample out because I packed it up for my wax class. But basically, we're going to take either a round or an oval, depending on what I find in my collection that's going to be right for the project, cabochon. And the principles of it, and the reason it's in this chapter, is that we just did what we're going to do in grand scale with that downward pressure. So the Roman setting, that's the first one in chapter 6 that we've skipped over, is about using those hand tools writ large over what we just did to push material down and create that kind of a pressurized, pushed in ring around the stone. So we're going to start with carving a wax that will have pre-made wall shapes for it. So the stone will set in just flat in it. And it doesn't have to be a cab for this one, I don't think. It's just easier on a cab because it really is designed to be downward pressure and not faceted flat surface pressure. And then I'll get it cast, and we will set it in a later session, depending on how long it takes to get cast. I may see if I can find somebody local who's willing to do a one-off for me. I'm just trying to not spend a whole lot of money on it because it's not something I'm going to use. I'll be using it as a sample and nothing else. And then we bounce back to I think the end of this chapter has our flush set. No, we got the flush set. False channel setting will be next, and that's a fun one because it has the look of the much harder to do channel setting without quite the effort. And then that's it in this chapter. This is a quickie. So, any questions? Any things to show off, I hope? Remembering that I would love to see, even if it's rough practice work, I'd love to get photos that I can send to John by the time we're done with this project, which is soon. Anybody show and tell? You got something? Of course. Let's see what you got, Spotlight. We can hear you now, theoretically.
Okay,
There we go.
sorry. I said I mute myself. Okay. All right. Well, I've been trying the cone setting, and I downloaded the template and did some things. I even made a tool, but didn't quite work. And then I tried the engraving, and then that's when I cut myself. So I was like, that's it.
So when you say the cone
So-
setting, do you mean the crown setting? The one that's done by making a cone and cutting away?
That template that I bought.
The plastic template, yeah. So you start with the arc and then you're going to cut pieces of it away, or you don't have to. John doesn't cover. Can you just make a cone and do a setting inside of it? And you absolutely can.
Yeah. So I can show you what I did.
Sure. You know from my sessions that we like to see the not fully successful ones as much as the successful ones. As long as there's a progression to eventually successful.
So
Yep.
this was the template.
Yep.
And then, I kind of did the pattern.
Good.
That was one. That was another one.
Yep. So what is the
Follow
challenge
it.
you're having with it by the time you've laid them out?
Well, I did it in paper so that I can put it on the metal,
Yep.
but then I can't really.
Okay. So I can tell you exactly what your challenge is. You're using very thick metal, but you've left yourself a tiny little bottom curve. And so your metal is so thick that it's catching down at the bottom of the cone. Think of it as more like it's right now you're trying to get more of an ice cream cone so that it comes to a point rather than you should have a little bit more opening. So give yourself a little bit, like scoot up your template a little bit and give yourself a little less material down at the bottom. You don't need to go all the way down to the point. You just need enough height that, again, when your stone is in there, its coulette is hidden inside of the thing. You don't need to go all the way to the bottom of the angle, which you're almost to the bottom of your angle when you're doing it. Trim away a couple rows from the bottom.
From here.
Yeah, from that end of it, trim away 2 or 3 stripes worth of material. And then you'll be able to close it up again because you're running into your own metal at the bottom.
Yeah, because I also tried this one
Yep.
with thinner metal,
Yep.
but
it's the ice cream cone effect at the bottom that you're fighting. So as soon as you make it a little shorter, you could even salvage that one that you just held up by just carefully cutting a little bit off of the bottom, like maybe 1 millimeter or 2 off the bottom.
Mhm.
you would be able to probably salvage that one.
Because
They
I
have a
was
video.
trying-
Oh, they do have a
I-
video of how to use the template?
Right, it's on the website. I think it's Auto Fry that you got it. It's
Nice.
the guy who made that shows a video, so
Very cool.
yeah.
Thank you.
I did see the video,
Yeah.
and that's how I ended up like using the tape because
He
he
said
talks
not
about
to-
that.
Only to cut it, like a millimeter longer than the depth of the,
Of the stone?
yeah.
Yeah,
You know,
that makes
like-
sense. That
Yeah.
makes sense. With the 17-degree angle, you're getting a pretty steep cut back. So I think that's going to be your big challenge. And just lay it out. And if I've shown you guys the metal foil that I use for modeling things, right? Have I shown that I know I showed it in my classes.
That was
but
a long
for those
time
of you
ago,
that I
yeah.
didn't show, I'll pull that out.
And then I
This
made
is a
some
Jane
tools.
Redmond tool. Oh, good. So yeah, the other thing is you don't have 17-degree punches that you're working with. So you're fighting your own angles because one is too steep and one is too narrow.
Yeah.
So you need to go find a better cone for yourself for that. Hang on a second. Let me just show this for folks that haven't seen it. So this is basically florist's foil. It's heavier than tin foil. And you can get it in different colors, but the one that I love is one that's gold on one side and silver on the other. And you can model, because it holds its shape. So you could cut your patterns out in this and model. You could actually shape it the way that it will shape into a cone. That would also help you find if you have the right angle of cone that you're working on when you're doing the real deal. It's fabulous for modeling. It's also great for modeling when you're doing hydraulic press work. You can get the general shape that you're going to get out of a pressing and so on. So magic stuff. Did you have more to show us, Carmen?
Yeah, I made a ring.
Of course you made a ring.
Of course you did, yeah.
No, really?
Running out of
Right?
fingers.
Ooh,
Nice.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
pretty.
I like
Very nice.
that.
Very
What's the
pretty.
stone that you got there?
It's called reticulated.
Rutilated? Is it rutilated quartz?
Yes.
Okay, nice. One of
Rutilated
my
quartz.
favorites. Rutilated quartz. So one bit of feedback on that. Keep an eye on it. If you are finding that you're getting caught on things, you may want to cut a chunk off of each prong because those are you don't need prongs that long to hold it in place. You could get away with half that length folded over the top on each of them if you wanted to.
Well, I started because I did this one last year.
Nice. Yep.
And I kind of want to start a series. And then because this stone was not that, I mean, I bought it to practice, but it's not that beautiful. You know?
So you wanted more material in the way of the
So,
line.
and then I'm thinking, okay, can I do this? And then I filed it down. It didn't seem like it was going to catch anything. And I kind of thought,
Good.
oh, I kind of like the way it sort of
Yeah.
makes a cross or something.
I
It
like
definitely, it's an interesting visual image from above. The
Yeah.
only thing that I worry about that length is that sometimes like you catch it on a sweater and it pulls up kind of thing. So just to watch for it. If it does happen, then you know that you could get away with less material.
Yeah, but you know, those are the perils of being stylish.
Right.
Wear sweaters.
That's true. I love making completely unrealistic to wear on a regular basis. costumes.
Yeah, it's fashion.
Yeah.
I got a lot of those.
Did anybody else have stuff to show? You do, Wendy? Is that a yes? Yay, Wendy.
It's a yes. what I-
Oh,
Let's see.
Ooh, and you're
Oh.
working in gold? This is from
It's
the
in gold.
workshop you did?
It's the 22 karat gold
Oh, that's
Wow.
in a bicolored tourmaline
Oh my
With-
gosh.
Oh.
with granulation. The granulation didn't work very well because I bought the metal from Rio and it's a different quality than
Yeah.
what she sells. So anyway, I got little tiny granules in there and
I
It's
can
not
see
cleaned up
them.
yet.
And that
Still
color
back?
is just so gorgeous, the
It's
color.
beautiful.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
love that.
And how's the back? Can I see the back?
Well, like I say, it's not cleaned up yet. I still have some
Oh,
wheels to do it.
okay.
So
Nice.
still
So
want-
you fabricated the whole thing and then you added the bail? You soldered the bail or was
yeah,
that
you
wall
leave a
work?
little, you leave a tab on your back plate and then you solder the bail in between that tab.
Okay.
Very
Mhm.
nice.
You see that tab in there that I still have to clean up, but
Inside.
not really well.
Yeah.
This instructor specializes in ancient Roman techniques that she was taking, the class she was taking.
Yeah.
And I have a friend who just loves the class. I'm so excited that you two had a class together, though.
Yeah, she was
That is
great.
awesome.
And she and my daughter, we ended up finding out that she and my daughter were on flag twirling team together in high school.
That's
So-
fabulous. Very nice work. Anybody else have anything they want to show? I can show you my latest, although well, I guess they are stone setting. They're just old school bezel setting. So I've been, I got some new shapes for my, my best selling collection, which is called Pendulum. And so this is, oh, I guess I got to spotlight myself again, don't I? So this is the latest shape in the Pendulum collection, which some of you voted for me, trying to figure out which direction I was going to hang them. But this is all natural stones. I just really love the color range. And
The
then
druzy,
Like
yeah.
those drusies?
it's druzy, natural drusies. This is a collection that sells better than anything else I do.
Oh,
Wow.
pretty.
What is the chain? What is the necklace?
This is a steel neck, I mean, a silver neck wire that unfortunately the company was, it was based out of Czechoslovakia and didn't survive the COVID transition.
Oh,
So when I run out of them, I either have to figure out how to make them myself because I use a bloody lot of them, or I have to find somebody to make them for me. They're not challenging in terms of the tube. The hard part for these is getting them perfectly round scale. So I may have to make myself a giant jig just for making the neck rings once I run out. And
I bet
then,
they hang beautifully, I bet.
Yeah.
so people have mixed feelings about them, frankly, so the stones hang beautifully, but not everybody likes to wear such a firm solid, because it's a solid cable, I mean, a solid wire, it's not a cable. And so not everybody likes how it hangs on their collarbones. It takes getting used to. But what I've found is usually when people feel that way, they've tried on the wrong size. Because they definitely, you really want it to hit just across the collarbone in order for it to rest naturally. Otherwise, it sort of sticks up like an old flip up collar kind of thing.
Yeah, no, you don't want that.
And then the other shape that I picked up recently, because I couldn't get to my East Coast buyer, so I was desperate and was buying from somebody new, but they had these cool shapes. I feel like these are sort of Klimtian in their shape, but unfortunately I only have a few sets of them that they had, because I will only use these if they're natural stones. I don't like, I'll use dyed, but I won't use coated. I cannot stand titanium coated stones.
These are cool. This is the one I will wear more than
Yeah.
the silver.
And I was pleased that I managed to find the black net. This is a steel neck wire that's been plastic coated or rubber coated or something. And it's a little more elegant than I thought, because I do have people that ask for something other than the silver, but
Right.
it needs to have a little bit of the curve built into whatever it's hanging on in order to properly lay out the design. If it's just on a chain, it just droops on you and sort of everything piles up and traffic jams at the bottom.
No, this
So
is
Very
That's-
nice.
thanks.
very
And then I've got
modern.
matching
Looks very
earrings.
modern to me.
Yeah, it is. It's modern, but also classic. And I think that's why it's selling so well, is it's got the streamlined. The original shapes were trillions and round and squares. And to find the teardrops, I was super excited because my
The
main-
ear wires come straight out from that?
Yep, it's a post. This whole series is a post.
Oh,
so
okay.
not wired.
Yeah, nice.
It has, I like it because then it has left right movement, not forward back movement. So it has flow design wise, but it doesn't have flippy floppy, rotating all over the place kind of
This
activity.
look good on you. Do you wear this when you go to the market?
I right now I have to get my ears re-pierced because they closed up
Those
recently.
are really good on you. I think if I was you, I will wear those all the time.
So when I go out, I need to remember to wear my jewelry more because literally I've been fighting them closing up for years, but they completely closed up one of them, and so I have to find a place that's going to re-pierce for me, and hopefully they'll re-pierce exactly where I had them, but I don't know if
Claire's.
they're willing to go through the scar tissue or not.
Claire's will do it for you.
What will?
That shop called Claire's, where the teenagers go to get their stuff, is the only place I think will pierce.
Got it.
That's
I'll take a
specialty.
I was going to go to a tattoo and piercing specialist.
Probably
Oh
cost you
yeah,
more.
maybe them too. Yeah, probably. You see more of those. Yeah.
Yeah, and around Portland especially, there are fewer teeny bopper
Yeah.
shops, and more tattooists.
Mm.
Anybody else have anything to share, or shall we call it a slightly early night this time?
Yeah.
All right, gang.
No, I don't have anything.
What was that?
I have a new torch, but I'm building the hood for it.
Building the what
And
for it?
I'm doing the exhaust. I brought
Vent system.
you know, like the one you have, the duct.
Yeah. So you're putting some
duct,
ducting to go outside from.
Exactly. So that's what I'm doing for acetylene. I never had acetylene before, so I'm like, wow.
I grew up on acetylene and I prefer it to anything else. Even if I'm doing an oxy combo, I want to be doing acetylene. I like the heat of it. I like the control of it. I know it's dirtier, but it's still sort of relative because it's safer in a house. And frankly, you can't get, you may lose your house insurance if you use tanked propane inside in the United States.
I have just like a tiny tank, and I never had the acetylene. I learned with it, but then I had the little Smith because it's a small place.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I'm really excited. I think I'm gonna like it a lot.
Nice. And if you have oxygen, it means you can do more casting for yourself.
Yeah, but I'm not doing that right now. You let us know who is
Too many hats. Too many
Right.
hats.
too many hats. I can't take it anymore. And you know, the wife hat in my case is the biggest. And I hate it.
I was thinking more, so I don't do my own casting, like spin casting and so on. But I was thinking more, one of my favorites to do, although I only do it outside and never near anybody's farm, is I do straw casting. And the reason I don't do it near a farm is because burning hay will freak the horses out. But straw casting has some really phenomenal shapes.
Yeah. I did it in the class. This is really nice.
Yeah. All right, gang.
Rachel, I have a funny story for Sonia.
Sure.
So in Arizona, you can't buy denatured alcohol in California. So while I was in class, I sent my husband out to Ace Hardware. He bought, I was thinking these small little cans. So Sonia, I got us these cans that are
oh my God.
I know, enough to last us a lifetime. So if you need any, let me know.
Okay, thank you.
Nice.
That's so funny.
Well, you guys have a collective down there. You can share on buying giant tubs of pickle. You can do all kinds of good shares.
Yeah, but this one
Anyway.
Okay.
All right, gang. I will see you in 2 weeks. Is that right?
Thank you, Rachel.
And we'll do the wax carving layer.
Thank you, Rachel.
Bye all.
Cool.
Bye.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.